Hello there, welcome back to the booth here at Pro Tour Hour of Devastation. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe, and I am joined by Luis Scott Vargas. We've got one more draft of Limited for you Limited junkies out there. One more round of draft, and boy, is it a doozy. We've got Frank Karsten versus John Finkel. Also, both players still in top 8 contention, sitting at 8-2, and looking to carry that only 2 losses into the standard rounds. As we wrap up here, let's head down. It's time for round 11 here from Kyoto. Hello and welcome to coverage of Pro Tour Hour of Devastation. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Luis Scott Vargas, and it's time for round 11 action, where we have a pair of Hall of Famers faced off, sitting at 8-2 records. First and foremost, John Finkel. Oh, he's already in battle mode, it looks like.
He's already in the tank. He's like
he is
looking at a tough decision.
Maybe he's regretting his mulligan choice here. He plays for Team Puzzle Quest. Across from him is Frank Karsten. That's right. You may know Frank more from his coverage duties these days. He does both writing and video coverage for us here on the coverage team. But Frank is a excellent Magic player, and he is sitting at 8-2 at the Pro Tour and looking to try to actually put together a potential run for a top 8 here. Let's see what Frank can come up with. A very good play on turn 2. Steward of Solidarity for Karsten means he's got a premium 2-drop lined up, and he's already kind of put the pressure on John to do something about it. Ooh, how about an Obelisk Spider, though, for Finkel?
Yeah, and apparently John has 4 copies of Obelisk Spider in his deck.
Whoa. What?
Yeah.
That's not a typo? Or?
No, he's got 4. And that's going to make it pretty hard for Frank to get by them. It's so good against red-white aggro, and they do stack quite well in multiples.
Also good against Dauntless, Aven, and 1/1 creatures that the Steward's going to make. So this is not looking great for Frank. His entire game plan bricked right now by one single creature.
So Frank currently looking, he needs some sort of passes and type effects.
Okay, well, it looks like an unquenchable thirst here to lock down the shenanigans. And is that a Dune Diviner as the follow-up here as well?
Finkel's playing a lot of good defense here. And taking a look to see what his payoffs are, he's got a Horror of the Broken Lands. Rags to Riches looking pretty good in this particular matchup as well.
Man, how about this Obelisk Spider? Look at what it's holding back now.
Oh.
An entire board here from Karsten.
So the one thing that John might actually be short on is big finishers. He does have, like Bantu's Last Reckoning, he has a lot of good defense, but doesn't have a whole lot of ways to close out a game. Oh, no, never mind.
Spider?
He's got an Approach of the Second Sun, so that's what he's waiting for.
Wow, so his game plan is to sit behind what is now 2 Obelisk Spiders and a Dune Diviner, gaining life, blocking, and then eventually he'll use that Manolith to cast Approach of the Second Sun and win the game that way. You know, I got to say, that game plan looks pretty good against Karsten at the moment. Yeah, and Frank just doesn't have much he can do. Dutiful Servants isn't going to change this board. Although John draws this card. Wow, Bantu's Last Reckoning. And just passes the turn back.
Yeah, he's in no hurry. He's got the board stable, doesn't need to add more to the board. And he's got Wander in Death to pick up these spiders once the Reckoning hits them.
I suppose he would like to keep hitting his land drops because he does have some more expensive cards, but...
Yeah, but he's not even in that much of a hurry, and every time Frank adds another creature to the board, things just get that much better for John. He's even got that Dune Diviner getting him a life per turn.
He does. Draws a land for the turn, so that will happen as well. Wow, John is really in a favorable position. Let's take a look at some of the cards that he's working with in hand here. Bantu's Last Reckoning, we mentioned, the Wander in Death as well. He's also got Farm to Market Final Reward, too. So what do you think is going through Frank's mind here? He seems to be brick-walled by these defensive creatures.
I assume some sort of numerical calculation, just based on a probability. But it's going to be hard for Frank to really punch through this wall of spider here. The spiders, even because they drain 2 with 2 of them in play, every time a -1/-1 counter is placed, you don't even get that much damage through, even if you're attacking 6 creatures into 3. And because John has multiple tricks here, he's got a final ward he can play, he has farm to table, he can kill one of the attackers. I think that it's going to be hard for Frank to get damage through.
Yeah, he's running the numbers to see if there's any opening to try to get something through, but especially with John sitting at 21 life, the prospect of getting through for 4 or 6 even isn't really that great. He is going to attack with both of his Steadfast Sentinels, though. Is he just trying to get those in the graveyard at some point?
Maybe, but he's getting drained for 4 here.
Yeah, this is a big swing here. These obelisk spiders have a lot of rules text on them. And one of them is that last segment there. Whenever you put the counters on creatures, you drain. And, of course, that's going to happen for both spiders on both triggers, so it's 4. John draws a Feral Prowler, decides he'd rather just leave up his final reward.
It's funny that this is the most painful way I've seen Steadfast Sentinel dying.
Seriously. But that is what Frank's going for here, right? Just to try to start eternalizing. These now have 2 counters, and they took a damage for the turn, so they are going to die. But it cost a whole lot of life, both lost for Karsten and gained for Finkel. But you can see why he did this.
It's so good for John, too, because
John just drew another spider.
Because John has Bantu's Last Reckoning in hand, so he's still just going to be able to kill them, and now killing the Eternalized version of them is even better.
I'm so jealous of John Finkel's position in this game right now. This is exactly where you want to be. He has all the options. He's got all of his bases covered. And Frank gets to make, finally, his first profitable attack. Are we going to see? And it looks like John's going to just trade off one of the spiders for the eternalized creature here.
Yeah, and he only gets to drain 1 at this point, but it's still fairly strong here.
Right, and like you said, he has a way to get those spiders back anyway, plus an additional one in his hand. And poor Frank is left to just try to grind through all of this, and it feels like it's going to be impossible. Frank with the big fist pump there after taking down one of the spiders. He is going to be very bummed when John's game plan comes to fruition here. It was an open fire off the top for Karsten. I mean, is there anything that, like, Glorybringer? That's the type of card that he needs here, right, to start making headway?
Karsten needs something very large, and his deck looks like a solid red-white deck, but like one of his bombs being Dusk Till Dawn is not really matching up all that well against the spiders. He's got 3 Dauntless Avens. He does have Angel of the God Pharaoh and Adorn Pouncer. These are both solid threats, but I'm not seeing anything that's going to let him really get back, especially from this huge life total deficit.
I mean, I almost jokingly said, when you were talking about win conditions for Finkel, that he's got the spiders, and they've actually done a pretty good job here. The Dauntless Haven is going to untap the Steward of Solidarity that was Unquenchable Thirsted as well.
Well, I mean, he gets a combat at that point. He's dead already. So damage.
John's going to cash in the Feral Prowler on a chump block and just eat the Dauntless Haven with his spider. And Frank is going to use that open fire to finish off the spider, but this is just playing beautifully into Finkel's game plan.
Yeah, so far, Frank's just putting more and more cards into the board, right? Whether it's removing John's creatures or playing his own, and that's just going to make Bantu's Last Reckoning that much more devastating.
And John is going to fire that off here, right?
Seems fairly likely he
is at 37. He can take a hit. Yeah, and there it is, Bantu's Last Reckoning. Oh, no. What a beating. Frank calmly puts every single one of his creatures into the graveyard. Does John want to play a spider or just preserve his mana? He's just going to pass. Oh, he doesn't have black mana for the spider anyway.
Frank does have Dust Held on, so at some point he might be able to cast the Aftermath version of that and get 3-4 creatures back. But
Okay.
for the time being, he's content just to embalm here, it looks like.
That was a consign to Oblivion off the top there for Finkel. He's just going to play an Obelisk Spider, though, using the Manolith. That's kind of a tricky way to get around Bantu's Last Reckoning, at least a little bit of it. What do you think Frank said when he played that third Spider? He's got to be like, you've got to be kidding me.
Frank is a good sport. I think he thinks it's probably funnier more than anything else. But, yeah, he probably thinks this whole thing is very amusing, even though it's pretty bad news for his chances of actually winning the game.
And here's Oblivion to knock out 2 of the last 3 cards that Frank has. His hand is Dust of Dawn, Hollow One, and a land. No, it's a Wing Shepherd. He's going to cycle it first. What's the reasoning on cycling it first?
If he thinks he's going to discard it, he might as well cycle it, because maybe he'll find something better than, like, Hollow One.
Upgrade something in his hand. Spider in. Frank Karsten is falling down to 7. Updates from our side tables. Paulo Vitor Domitoresa just refuses to lose here. He's up a game over Luis Bachot over there. And then also Martin Yuza, who, again, if he wins this last round, will be your draft master. He's up a game over Bran Mulders. Makis Matsoukas, who is also in that race for a bit, though seems to have realistically fallen away from him. He is up a game over Adam Snook. Looks like Matsoukas has got a Scorpion God on his side. And that does
powerful ally.
Indeed. Okay, well, check this turn out for Frank Karsten here, Luis. This is a... Look at this. Draws 4 after dumping the rest of his hand on the battlefield. Does this give him a shot?
Do you see the advantage bar moving?
I did not see it moving.
John Finkel using
Kind of rhetorical, but you do have to answer.
Wandering Death, getting back Obelisk Spiders. I don't see how Frank gets...
It's just savaging.
Looks like the spider's caught itself a couple of flies here.
No kidding. God. Frank has to work his way through 5 of these that have been cast this game.
And it gets to drain for 3.
That was a -1/-1 counter. I don't think John needs a win condition.
No?
He's winning 40-4, and he's attacked for a grand total of 1 damage this game.
This is definitely
I wasn't able to be the first.
Look at these guys laugh.
Okay, let me think if there's anything.
We can't hear the table mics at all, just FYI.
I'll just take
Yeah, I know that's the problem. I can't get out of the way of it.
See Frank playing with all his cards face up and, well, putting them back into his deck.
All right, so that's going to do it. 40-2 for John Finkel, who attacked a couple of times total that entire game and got the job done without the fancy stuff. He's going to be up a game. Martin Hughes is up a game. Paulo Vitor Domitoresa is up a game. And Makis Matsoukas is up a game. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll have more live Magic here from Kyoto. Don't go anywhere.
Check out Hour of Devastation booster draft leagues on Magic Online. Draft anytime, play anytime. Available now. For more information, visit mtgo.com.
back to the feature match area here at Pro Tour Hour of Devastation. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe. I'm in the booth with Luis Scott Vargas, and we're going to take a little live look in action while our main match gets ready here. We've got Martin Yuza versus Bram Mulders. Now, of very important note here, Luis, Martin Yuza has overtaken the lead to become draft master and secure a seat at the World Championship, regardless of any other factors. And if he wins this match, in fact, if he wins this game, he will be exactly that, your draft master here for 2017. If he doesn't, it could open up a bunch of tiebreaker scenarios, depending on how things pan out. And how's it looking for Martin here?
Well, Adorned Pouncer getting internalized is a pretty big game. So because of that Oasis Ritualist, Martin could even play a Chaos Maw, but that wouldn't handle the 4/4. So there's a chance he wants to figure out a way to deal with that. He could play Chaos Maw and set up an Ambuscade for the 4/4 next turn, but that requires taking 8 points of damage.
Could he just block?
He could. He could also just trade off the 6/6. Given the fact that Martin has Sandworm Convergence in hand, it seems like preserving his life total is going to be very important here. So
Okay.
wouldn't be surprised if he exerted the Ritualist just to slam Chaos Maw.
Yeah, we see that Martin's under some pretty serious pressure here from Bram, but he may have the tools to dig himself out. And here we go, Chaos Maw. That's going to kill 2 of Bram's 3 creatures. Straight away, it's going to leave Martin's board intact and give him a blocker for the Adorned Pouncer that's been brought back from the dead here.
And 4/4 Double Strike is always frightening, especially against a green-white deck who can easily have multiple pump spells in hand.
Yeah, it's so brutal. You don't want to just casually block with your 7-mana bomb, but oh, no attack there from Bram, but he's got a nice play. He plays that Angel, and yeah, you're going to want to read that one, Martin. It's Angel of Condemnation. And that is going to wreak havoc with this board. Bram can pay 2 and a white and tap it to exile a creature, and then it'll come back. Or he can pay 2 and a white, tap and exert to exile the creature until the Angel leaves. Kind of like a flying Oblivion Ring. It also is a 3/3 flying with Vigilance, so it'll allow him to apply pressure to Martin's life total and even use the ability while doing it. So Martin's really got his hands full here.
He does, but he also has Ambuscade, so he could potentially try to just take out the Angel right now.
Yeah, the fact that Bram didn't attack last turn is a big sign for Martin that he doesn't have a combat trick here, right? You can't nod. You have to say it.
I'm trying to figure out whether why Martin wanted to not. It looks like Martin's actually passing. Okay, he was.
Was he considering?
Yeah, he almost passed. That's what was interesting. There is he then reread the Angel and decided it would be a bad idea. So yes, the Angel doesn't signify that Bram doesn't have a combat trick. It might be that Bram just thought that having the Angel up next turn would be much safer, because it looks like Bram has Mouth to Feed as his Aftermath card, and he has a Jero's Resolve, so he did have a trick. He could have attacked into it, but he didn't have enough white mana to lead both. So
it was actually a mana consideration there rather than a tell. And this will show Martin, hey, maybe he does have something.
So double blocking doesn't help a ton, because double strike means you can just take out the Watchers of the Dead first.
And still have enough left over to finish off the Maw. So he's just going to simply block and end up trading for a Jero's Resolve. And of course, this is why Adorned Pouncer is so powerful, is that it turns cards like Jero's Resolve, your 20th card or whatever, into a straight removal spell in this scenario. And there's Mouth from Bram, who passes the turn back. But now the Ritualist is online, and that was also a land off the top. So if Martin wants, he can just...
The Sandworms are going to converge.
Exactly.
It is a bit annoying for Martin that Bram's going to be able to draw 2 cards off of Feed. But I think that Sandworm Convergence is going to make up for that quite nicely.
Martin's mulling over his options here. He may be able to play 2 spells in a turn instead, and is considering if that would be a better option. You know, option A would be Sandworm Convergence. It basically is in all scenarios. But, you know, he's looking at maybe, how much mana does he have available? Well, he's got 8, so let's just play Sandworm Convergence. Make a 5/5 and really put a lot of pressure back on Bram here. Martin's at 13, but he's facing down a pretty scary creature. But a steady stream of worms would be quite nice. And Bram's going to use the better part of his mana for the turn here to cast Feed. And then a Catcher's Monument. And I got to say, Martin's got to breathe a sigh of relief at that.
Yeah, when you get to untap with Sandworm Convergence in play, you feel pretty good about the situation. And Martin's still going to be able to add random dorky creatures to the board every single turn here. He's got Scrounger of Souls and Quarry Beetle and
Oh, yeah.
you know, all sorts of nonsense. But it's the real payoff is just getting that Sandworm every turn. And I wouldn't be surprised if Martin started attacking pretty soon here.
I actually thought he might there, but he's going to play it a little bit safer. And Bram's going to kind of flood the board with creatures. He's actually going to end up with 4 extra creatures this turn off of the Disposal Mummy and the Ronus' Stalwart, plus the 2 tokens he's going to garner as well. So this board's getting muddled up, but in the token race, when you are the one with the 5/5s versus the 1/1s, well, you know, you'd rather be in there.
It's the 5/5s because they're bigger.
Now that's the kind of hard-hitting commentary I was looking for, Luis. Thank you for that. Martin has an interesting choice there. I believe he has a Beneath the Sands in his hand, and I think he's just going to end up cycling it here. We'll wait. Because if Martin wins this, he gets it. Now, our main table is ready to go, but we're actually going to stay here for a bit because there's a lot on the line for Martin Yuza. Ooh, open fire off the top. He's got a few targets for that. Maybe can break up a multi-block from Bram.
I also really like getting a giant spider down at some point here for Martin because one of the ways he could lose is something like attack with the Dorn Pouncer before blocks Mighty Leap it, so it gets around Sandworm Convergence, which does prevent flyers from attacking, and then have another pump spell and, you know, attack in for 14 in the air or 16 in the air.
Yeah, and that actually is a really interesting point, Luis, because that's very unlikely, right? We're talking about having 2 specific types of spells, but that's exactly what the pros are thinking about when they're this far ahead, right? They're trying to, you know, cordon off any possible way that Bram could steal a game, because Martin knows a couple of more turns with Sandworm Convergence and he's going to have this thing in the bag anyway. Other cards that Martin probably is considering are cards like Overcome, right? Like that's the type of card that can really change the math in a big way. We've also seen cards like Appeal to Authority have a similar effect where they can be responsible for a lot of damage out of one single card if you have a big board state, and Bram does here. Luis, also, I am curious, so both of these players are sitting at 7 and 3. What does their top 8 hopes look like here?
The loser is effectively eliminated from top 8 contention. Not a guarantee, but I would say, especially at a slightly larger Pro Tour, pretty unlikely. And, well, Bram just sees the writing on the wall. He does.
Wow, just extended the hand there. Martin Yuza wins.
Yep, his.
Okay, kind of interesting. You know, Martin saying, well, I was trying to play around Appeal to Authority, one of the cards that you and I were just talking.
There's the Mighty Leap.
Look at that. He says, I had it. It was in there somewhere. But that's Martin Yuza winning. And you know what? That's going to make him our draft master.
A deserving title for Martin Yuza.
You know, he's always been known as a really strong limited player, and he's just showing us why. Congratulations to Martin Yuza. Great stuff from him, finishing off this draft strong and locking out, making sure that no tiebreakers, no nothing. He's going to be our draft master. Let's go back over to our main table where we've got a pair of Hall of Famers, Frank Karsten and John Finkel, squaring off with Finkel really dominating game one in sort of a passive way. Traveler's Amulet kicks things off for Finkel. No 2-drop from Karsten? What in the...
He's a very reactive hand. Dusted on, impeccable timing.
Let's see.
And then Inoketa's Name and Pursue Glory are both like reasonable cards once you have a board position, but yeah, Frank is just not coming out the gates here.
I wonder how much Frank changed the makeup of his deck after having seen 3 copies of Obelisk Spider. There is another one in John's list that he doesn't know about. Frank's going to go ahead and play the Blood Rage Brawler here, and he's going to get rid of the Steadfast Sentinel. He knows that he can get value out of that later on, so that's the discard choice for him. John's going to cycle a Wasteland Scorpion, and now he's going to go grab a land. He's going to find an island. John calmly, coolly, as always, proceeding through the game. And there's a Blood Rage Brawler, and it's going to get immediately chump blocked by Finkel. He just wants to draw cards, and uh-oh. Bantu's Last Reckoning off the top as Frank continues to build out his board. Where's all the
Well, there they are. John already had one in hand as well.
Let's take a look at what John's working with. Oh, boy. And he does feel the need, though, to develop his mana base here because, as you can see, it's all spells in hand. So he's going to go ahead and cast a Beneath the Sands.
And now that Frank has seen Bantu's Last Reckoning, the odds that Frank just, immediately slams another creature into play seem like they go down quite a bit.
Okay, so that's a nice hit, though, for Karsten here, who does have a reasonable start going. He will be looking over, though, and saying, which land did you get? Oh, another swamp. Well, it looks like he feels like he just needs to keep adding to the board, and that is going to open up the opportunity for Finkel to do this. Bantu's Last Reckoning, no greed from Finkel here. He's just going to take his clean 3-for-1, and that is going to put him way ahead in this game. Frank still with just a single Plains. And there's another one. So, a couple of updates as well. Makis Matsoukas has defeated Adam Snook and improved to 8-3. He beat him 2-0. And was this Frank Karsten playing Dusk? Excuse me, Dawn, just to get it into the graveyard?
Yep. And I was wondering if he was going to have to do that. The unenviable position of not even cycling, just casting it to the graveyard in order to cast Dawn next turn.
Yeah, he can't be happy about the tempo hit that he's taking, but it does set up a better long game strategy for him. Also, Luis, Paulo Vitor Damarosa just won his match 2-0. He's 11-0 in the tournament.
Yep.
What does he need for top 8?
One more win.
One more out of the next 5?
Yeah, he's got a pretty good shot, I would say.
Okay. All right, so 3 cards back to hand here for Karsten, thanks to Dawn.
But, Finkel discarded the hand size last turn. He had so many cards that he ended up, he just had 8 cards in hand, all action. And I think he's still in fantastic shape. Because remember, those cards that Frank has there, he's just revealing them for a courtesy. They're in his hand. They're not in play yet. Some of them are about to be in play. In fact, 2 of them are likely to be in play. But they aren't there yet.
Be really impressed if Frank was able to pull out a win. This matchup just seems horrendous for him.
Oh, yeah.
John has a deck that is almost tailor-built to beat what Frank put together.
And John might actually just slam approach of the second sun here and just have the clock, start for Frank.
That's exactly what he's going to do. So up to 21 for John Finkel. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Seventh card down, so 6 ahead.
Ba-boom.
And there we go.
One of the sweetest cards in the format in terms of alternate win conditions. And now every time John cycles, like he has a Wander in Death in hand, for example, that cuts a turn off the clock.
So we'll track this. We'll see how long it actually takes him to go and which card's upcoming. And Frank probably doesn't have any way to interact. There actually are a few cards in the set that will let you mill it away or shuffle or something like that. But unlikely that Frank has access to that kind of thing. So Frank's going to go ahead and exert his Steward of Solidarity. And does he just have to throw this Aven right into the spider?
Yeah, and then use impeccable timing to finish off the spider.
Okay, he will still lose his Aven in this transaction. But he'll be happy to get that spider off the battlefield at least. And then he's got another Dauntless Aven to replace it as well. John gets to untap. There's one card away.
The funny thing is, cycling Wander in Death is also similar to just getting back Horror of the Broken Lands, which also still cycles.
So he could actually tear through his library pretty quickly, but I think Finkel doesn't feel that he needs to move all in. He can just get the spider back and just replay it, and Frank's basically in the same position he was before. Frank's going to go ahead and exert again on end step, making another warrior.
Frank has 3 X1 creatures in play, and John has an Obelisk Spider. Those numbers do not line up well for Frank.
No, not at all. Frank probably pretty excited about the 3 Dauntless Aven. It's a really solid card, but it is simply outnumbered by Obelisk Spiders, so... All right, there's a Steadfast Sentinel, and no attack this time. And there's that Horror of the Broken Lands getting cycled. There's card number 3 off the top. Look at Frank.
This isn't even a race. A race implies that both players are heading towards the same finish line. Frank's just not moving.
Right. Frank is watching John Finkel.
As we all are.
And John is just running a different race here. He's just not moving on the same axis that Frank is. Yet he's doing a remarkable job of stopping Frank from doing anything he wants to do as well. Man, I'm loving this deck from Finkel, by the way. I hope I get to draft a deck this good in the format at some point. He doesn't have any river hoopus, does he? He would have killed for one.
That would have been a different gold uncommon from our Devastation he would have liked, but I think he's probably going to be all right with his 4 copies of Obelisk Spider.
Yeah, he did get to play 2 river hoopus in the top 8 of the GP last weekend. So we'll forgive him here. The hoopu may not. Mummy Paramount now from Karsten. And no attacks again. Tick-tock.
Frank does have a Jira's Renunciation in hand, it looks like, and he could try to set up an Alpha Strike here if John gets too comfortable, but Frank is some amount of damage short of that being an effective strategy.
Okay, there's a Wretched Camel. And a land for John. And he's going to use Unquenchable Thirst here.
Yeah, you have a desert, right?
No, I actually said no trigger. Oh, sorry. I heard you say that.
And I suppose that John doesn't have a desert.
He does not. And John still has a final reward in hand.
He only needs to do this for 3 more turns, Luis, and then he's going to draw Approach of the Second Sun, and we'll call this thing a game. Frank needs to find a way to get in a ton of damage in a very short period of time.
This is where the pursue glory that Frank cycled, for good reason, he had nothing going on, would be really good. Because he would be able to maybe set up an attack where he attacks with 5 creatures, 6 creatures, and uses Pursue Glory to win the game.
So Frank's going to go ahead and exert that Steward one last time. And there's that Jarrow's Renunciation that you mentioned a second ago, Luis. That's going to tap down the spiders. And this could clear away for a very large attack from Karsten. But he is going to need multiple very large attacks to finish this game. He finds a Plains off the top.
And he does have Inoketcho's name. But only 1 zombie in play, so it's mostly just going to be +1/+1.
Okay.
So he's going to be some amount of damage
He
short.
could attack for 16 if nothing gets blocked. Maybe that gives him some outs, open fire type stuff.
If you're moving to combat,
I'm moving to
combat before you start your
Okay, well, John says, how about before you attack, I'm going to just take out your Dauntless Haven with my final reward. And this might change things from Frank. Let's see what he does. He really doesn't have much of a choice here. 4 out of the 5 have Vigilance. So John's just going to say, well, I'll just block with my Wretched Camel on your Mummy Paramount. And that's going to kind of force the issue here.
Frank gets 9 points of damage through, but he kind of used multiple cards to force through that much damage.
Right, and John's still at a pretty healthy life total here. Even after that hit, he's going to be at 12. And he'll get his 2 spiders back. Another Steadfast Sentinel. Not the hammer that he was looking for. This is card number 5 off the top of the library here for Finkel.
Oh, wow. And
Is that a Consign to Oblivion?
yeah, that's going to be huge because he can now bounce and then Oblivion Mummy Paramount or potentially a Steadfast Sentinel and just wipe out Frank's last card and know that Frank is down to top decks.
It's going to be the Mummy Paramount going back to hand, and then it's going to be Oblivion to get it out of his hand along with his other card there, a Puncturing Blow.
So Frank has 1 turn left. Because if he doesn't hit this turn, John draws card number 6, and then Frank gets 1 more attack left, and then John casts Approach of the Second Sun. It shows up, and well, both players still alive for top 8, even with a loss here. But it's certainly a world of difference being going into the constructor rounds at 9-2 versus 8-3.
And Frank just has to pass the turn back.
Oh, John drew a Cycling Desert.
All right, so that's going to be game then, as that is card number 7. That's Approach of the Second Sun, and that is John Finkel improving to 9-2, knocking down Frank Karsten to 8-3. Like you said, now Frank really has to run it up. And by the way, that was John saying, I didn't have 3 Obelisk Spiders. I had 4 Obelisk Spiders in my deck, as Frank can do not much, but just kind of shake his head there. Wow, great stuff down there. Luis, you take a year off, and now like Paulo's making a run for top 8. John's trying to extend the lead. You're going to have a lot of work to do when you get back down there at the next PT.
We'll see what we can do.
Great stuff from the feature match. It is, of course, going to do it for the draft portion of our Pro Tour. Really exciting stuff, great format, and it was fun to watch, but it is now time for us to transition over to Standard. We've got 5 rounds of that before we cut to our top 8 today. More on that, Draft Master, everything else at the news desk, but first, these messages.
Hello and welcome back to the News Desk. Maria Bartholdi here. While the players have broken for lunch, but don't worry, I'll be hanging out with you, and we've got plenty of great content to get you through lunch. We're going to take a look inside R&D coming up later in this lunch break, as well as another Enter the Battlefield, which I hear is supposed to be really funny and great, and that's coming up. But first, I want to talk to you really quickly about some results. Martin Yuza is your 2017 draft master. He has locked his spot in the World Championship. Congrats to him. Paulo Vitor Damaderosa won his last round, remaining undefeated at 11-0, but Yuza still tops him for draft master. Makis Matsoukas won his round as well, advancing to 8-3, and Sam Black defeats Seth Manfield. Those are both at 9-2. Well, speaking of Martin Yuza, let's hear from the man himself. Brian David Marshall is down on the floor with him right now.
Thanks, Maria. I'm here with Martin Yuza. Martin, you just said pretty good weekend.
Yeah, it can't possibly be any better. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could hoist a trophy, right?
Yeah, I guess I'm still X3. I'm doing pretty well, so yeah.
So let's talk about locking a spot at the World Championship. You are the draft master for the 2016-2017 Pro Tour season. What does it take to sustain success at Limited across a whole season on the Pro Tour?
I don't really know. I mean, it's pretty exciting, obviously. I guess I like aggro a lot. I prefer just being the guy that goes 2-drop, 3-drop something, and not just, draft the dirty decks that go cycling, don't play anything. So maybe that's my secret. I don't know.
I saw you, beating down with 5/5 worm tokens. Was that your first pick in your Amonkhet pack?
No. This was actually a super different draft. I first picked Chaos Maw in the first pack, and then I drafted like a defensive ramp deck, and I got past a 6th pick Sandworm Convergence in the third pack, which went through 2 green players, and it ended up winning me like basically almost every game. So yeah, that was a good way to round up my deck.
Yeah, normally you are a little lower on the mana curve.
Yeah, normally my mana curve stops at 4, so yeah.
Now, what is it like to get that off your back? Say, okay, the World Championship slot is taken care of. I don't need to worry about that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, coming into the PT, I had 54 points, so at least 57 by the end of the Pro Tour, which was most likely gonna be good enough. But it's still obviously nice to get that off my back and just be locked for Worlds, no matter what happens. So yeah, it feels nice. It's a great feeling.
Now you're going to go back to Standard. You have a slightly different take maybe on the Standard format than some of the other players playing the same color as you.
Oh yeah, I'm also playing kind of mono red, but I'm like more of Eldrazi, more removal. I guess I'm like control at the beginning, and then I switch gears. I can't just play all control. I have to have some creatures that attack for a lot. So it is a deck that I like, and I went 3-2 yesterday, which is not great, but we have five more rounds. So
now this is something you and I talked about earlier in the year. You said you were just going to play the decks that you really like. How has that worked out for you? What is that? That seems to fly in the face of a lot of the team logic that has evolved on the Pro Tour.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of edge in playing something different, something that people don't know. Like if I go, mountain to one guy, then everybody basically knows my 75 cards, and they know exactly how to sideboard and how to play the matchup. If I go Magma Spray, Handwear Garrison, and follow that up with Thought-Knot Seer and Reality Smasher, people are like, well, how do I sideboard against this? Like, should I bring in Radiant Flames for a 2/3 guy, or should I bring in Fumigate? But he also had a Scrounger that comes back from the graveyard, so that's not a great sideboard card. And that's like one of the few edges that you can gain these days when everybody has internet and people have all the good decks and people play on Modo, and that's one of the few edges that you can get. So that's one of the reasons why I like it.
So the secret to your success is confusing people.
I guess you can put it that way.
Now, so congratulations on winning the Draft Master title. Congratulations on getting elected to the Hall of Fame, and good luck down the stretch these last 5 rounds of Standard at the last Pro Tour of the season.
Thanks so much, Brian. Wow, what a year Martin uses, having Draft Master and Hall of Fame elect. Well, as one race closes, the race for Draft Master, another opens, the race for Standard Master. Where do we sit with that? We've got 5 rounds left to play. Sean McLaren, the lone wolf from Canada, as they call him, he only tested with his brother coming into this tournament, is currently tied for the lead with Argentinian Sebastian Pazzo. Both are 5 points clear of the third person in third right now, which is Li Shitian of Hong Kong. Well, we're going to pivot a bit and talk about Hour of Devastation. We're going to get an inside look from R&D on the mechanics of the set, Afflict, Eternalize, and the bump up in deserts. Let's learn more.
When we arrived on Amonkhet, we met 2 very different kinds of zombies. The black-aligned zombies animated out in the sand waste by something called the Wandering Curse, and the white-aligned serving mummies embalmed on purpose to serve the people of Amonkhet. Well, in Hour of Devastation, we meet a third kind of Amonkhet mummy, and it's a lot worse than the other 2. It turns out that the people who die in glorious combat in the trials have been taken out. Their bodies have been taken not to rest and not for a paradise, but they've been taken out and coated in this bluestone material called lazotap, purpose unknown for the moment. Their cartouches that they earned during life stay with them and encode their skills and abilities, all the training that they have. And so now we see that, in fact, the purpose of these glorified deaths, the purpose of these trials, was to create people in their physical prime, incredibly well trained, who can then die, be coated in lazotep, be raised as zombie Eternals, and fight as the most incredible undead army any world has ever seen.
So in Amonkhet, you can embalm your creatures so they return mummified. They're white zombies. This is sort of a natural thing that the people on the plane do. It's an Egyptian lore thing. But when we get to Hour of Devastation, it's another set. We wanted to sort of crank it up a notch. So Eternalize is sort of the upgrading version of that, where your creature becomes a 4/4 and actually keeps all the abilities. So this is to symbolize Bolas is doing better than embalming. He's internalizing.
The Eternalize is a really powerful ability, adds a ton of power to cards, and really impacts gameplay. You take a card like Proven Combatant, one of the worst cards we've ever printed. It's just a 1-mana 1/1. All of a sudden you staple on Eternalize, and your opponent may want to try and attack around it. They don't want it to die, because if they kill it, then it comes back as a 4/4, which is a lot higher impact.
The numbers 4/4 on Eternalize, I think, came from wanting to be big and feel splashy, but not being so big that we couldn't make them at common, for example. Even as it stands, there were a lot of development challenges working around Eternalize, just because if you have all of these creatures that are coming back at this exact same power and toughness, it makes what I think of as breakpoints really matter. A removal spell that does 4 damage is a lot different than a removal spell that does 3 damage in that context. A 4/5 creature is a lot different than a 3/5 creature, in that one of them can block and kill a 4/4, and the other, they kind of bounce off of each other. So it created a lot of situations where power level was very, very sensitive to just tweaking one number up or down by a point. That said, it was really enjoyable to develop the set around that, and I think that we were able to do a really good job with making Eternalize work. But it was something that we had to think a lot about from a power balance perspective.
Okay, so in Amonkhet, we saw the people go through the trials and they died and they got taken off on a barge across the ocean or whatever, across the waterway, through the gates and something. Now we find out what happens to them. We find out some of Bolas's larger scheme here is he's turning them into an army of zombie soldiers called the Eternals. So we knew, okay, you're going to meet the Eternals. And now the Eternals are blue, black, and red zombies that are these basically zombie soldiers. So we knew we wanted a mechanic for them, and we wanted to make sure that, look, these are a scary, this is a scary army. These are people that follow Bolas with every command because they're mindless zombies. It's kind of the perfect army. You can't ever disobey. They're not afraid of anything. They'll just keep marching on. And so what we wanted to do was made a mechanic that really reflected the idea of no matter what you do, these things are just going to harm you. And so we came up with a flick that's like, block me, don't block me, whatever, you're going to suffer.
Eternal of Harsh Truths is a really good example of an afflict card. It's a 3-mana 1/3, so it's a very easy card to block, but it has afflict too, so you may not want to block it. But if you get hit with it, the opponent gets to draw a card. So you really want to block it, but you don't want to take 2, so it just gives you a really interesting choice to make.
Deserts are something that we knew we wanted to have in the block from the very beginning, even starting with Amonkhet, but we weren't sure exactly how we wanted deserts to play, gameplay-wise. Did you want you to build a deck of all deserts, and put them all together and have these, synergies for playing with deserts? Or did we just want you to play with a couple, or do we just want deserts to be cool lands that had the desert type, but maybe there wasn't that much that keyed off of it? So Amonkhet experimented a little bit with deserts and kind of set the stage, but didn't really blow them out too much. So when we were looking at what to do with Hour of Devastation deserts, we saw a lot of opportunity there to kind of expand that a little bit.
There are a lot of really cool deserts in Hour of Devastation. So first, the original desert, it was a land sometimes, and sometimes it was a spell. So sometimes if you needed mana, you would tap it for mana. But if your opponent was attacking with a 1/1 or something, you could just kill this 1/1 with your land. So that's pretty useful. It's like a card that plays 2 roles. So a lot of the deserts in Hour of Devastation do that too. So for example, Haship Oasis. You can put it in your deck as a forest, and when you need green mana, you get green mana. But if you have a creature in play and your opponent doesn't have a blocker, you can just sacrifice a desert to give it +3/+3 and attack with it. So it's kind of like a giant growth attached to a land. It's kind of like a modal spell. Sometimes you have a land, sometimes you have a spell.
We knew that Hour of Devastation was going to be more about deserts than Amonkhet. It was one of the things that we were playing up in this set. And so we have a common cycle of creatures that all care about deserts. And, it wasn't in play testing and balancing the set that we figured this out. But I'm really happy to see that the creative team came through with putting some camels on these cards that care about deserts. Just works really well and adds a nice piece of flavor to the set.
So in Amonkhet, the exert mechanic was on attacking creatures. So you would attack with a creature, exert it, and your creature would get a stat bonus or a keyword ability or something. But in Hour of Devastation, the exert mechanic evolved a little bit. So instead of exerting your attackers, you would just exert your creatures for really cool effects. So for example, Pride Sovereign is a cat that you can pay white mana and tap it and exert it and make 2 cat tokens. And the card gets +1/+1 for each other cat you control. So you can just keep this guy, tap for a turn, make some cat tokens, and then when it finally does untap, it's gigantic.
Exert was a pretty straightforward mechanic in Amonkhet, but in Hour of Devastation, we got to add new things to it. So we have the creatures that have activated abilities, where you can exert the activated ability for a larger effect, and we even have the last cycle, where you get to see what happens when you exert yourself. So you cast Oketra's last, and all of a sudden, well, you're back to your starting life total, but you've exerted yourself so much, your lands on untap next turn.
So the exert mechanic allows you to sort of over-tap your creatures, and you get an extra benefit. So we wanted to say, what if you did that with spells? Could you sort of over-tap for your spell? And this led to cards like Bantu's Last Reckoning, where we'll give you the spell at a much cheaper cost, but your lands are sort of exerted, and so you end up paying for the spell again on the next turn. But in this way, we can sort of create this sweeper card that's only 3 mana, and it may be exactly what you need to save yourself.
After we sort of went through what those card designs would look like, we made a bunch of decisions about them, like we wanted them to be sorceries rather than instants, because if they were instants, there wasn't much choice involved. You could wait until the end of your opponent's turn, see exactly what your opponent chose to do with their turn, and then it was pretty obvious whether or not you wanted to cast this spell, and you weren't really leaving yourself vulnerable because you had full information about what your opponent had done on their turn. Sorceries are much more interesting. Now you have to predict a little bit about what is my opponent going to do on their next turn. If I decide to tap 3 mana and destroy all creatures, but my lands aren't going to untap next turn, what can my opponent do to me in that sort of 2-turn window there, where I've left myself vulnerable? So the decision making felt really cool, but it also felt really powerful to cast these cards at the same time. And that's kind of exactly the mix that we were going for there.
It was actually kind of a struggle, because at first we were like, how negative can this be? We're seeing one god die, and then another god die, and then another god die. And so we really wanted to emphasize this notion of these gods also were true believers in the system, that these 5 gods were also betrayed by that system.
So what we were doing is, we in Amonkhet introduced concepts, introduced things we knew we wanted that we would then ramp up when we got to Hour of Devastation. Okay, there's Embalm, you're bringing back things, but now there's gonna be bigger, more dangerous things. We had Exert, we're gonna add Exert and give you more ways you can use Exert. Deserts gets teased, all of a sudden deserts can be a thing. We have these things that we introduced, and then we sort of up the game. Like, you meet the gods, no, meet the real gods, the death, the god-killing gods. So like at each level, we built things that we could then ramp up in the final set.
Well, Team Musashi is currently leading the standings in the team series here at the Pro Tour. And as we all know, playing Magic is serious business, especially at the Pro Tour. But thanks to Enter the Battlefield, we get a chance to look at the lighter side of Team Musashi. Enjoy.
Throughout Magic the Gathering's history, Japan has consistently produced some of the game's best Pro Tour players. At times, they've been downright dominant. This year, in the newly created Pro Tour Team Series, one squad has stood above the rest, the Tokyo-based Team Musashi. Their murderer's row of Platinum Pros can boast a combined 16 Pro Tour Top 8s, 3 Player of the Year titles, and 2 Hall of Fame inductions. Each of the team's 6 members has won at least one Grand Prix. Yuya Watanabe has won 7. If you need someone to coach you on how to draft, they could do that too. And not just for Magic. They're also well versed in a fun Japanese tradition, the sushi draft.
いやそう早めに今ねこれ多分なくなりそうな気配があって今一番言われやすい山県バランスかよ受け取らせてくれるみんなちょっと賢ぶってるんちゃうそこにねなんかもう決め打ってるやつが確かにやっぱねちょっと断ち切った方がいいかな鍋だからこれ鍋のファーストピックここまでファーストピックここまであるけど3もあるあったよあったもんいやでもまだあるいや今からもう諦めて気ぃつけてあーミスったウニ行かれたウニとラーメンやったらよかったウニ2個になってもらったいや
もうみんなピックが分かってないイクラがこの中で一番の強カードということをみんな分かっていないさすがに5枚もイクラが取れてしまったらこの高は 3-0 私が優勝です。ありがとうございました。
Meanwhile, over at Japan's Magic Megastore, Haruruya, a giant of the game is hard at work. Kenji Tsumura is not only a 6-time Pro Tour Top 8er and Hall of Fame member, he is perhaps Japan's most universally beloved pro. Though he's now primarily a writer and editor for Haruruya, Kenji can still play with the best of them, repping Japan in the last 2 World Magic Cups, including 2015's Top 8 finish.
僕はものすごくアホだったので学校にあんまり行ってなかったのもあって、考える力っていうのはマジックを通じてついた力かなと思います。もともとあんまり数学とかが得意じゃなかったので、そういうのはマジックを通じて身についたものかなと。
For me, the quintessential Kenji moment is like he's the reigning player of the year, and he says, "I just got to get better at booster draft." Like none of his top 8s were individual booster draft. He had the team draft in Atlanta, a little bit different format. He's like, "I need to get good at booster draft." And he comes back the next year and just wins back-to-back booster draft Grand Prix.
もう結構前のことなんですけど、当時やっぱり初めて取れた時はすごく嬉しかったです。もう本当に感動して泣いてしまいそうになるぐらい嬉しかったです。本当にもうギリギリの勝負だったんで、オリバー・レールと1点差で取れたので、本当に嬉しかったです。これ以上ない名誉だと思います。
As Kenji's graced the Pro Tour with his affable presence for over a decade, he's gotten to know his countrymen quite well. His esteemed peers over at Team Musashi are no exception.
鍋君は個人的には、マジック史上日本でトップ3に入る実力者だと思います。年間最終選手も取ったことありますし、新人賞も取ったことありますし、ホールオブフェイムでもありますし、あと個人的に思うのは鍋君はとてもいい人、人間性もとても優れてる人だと思います。あととってもアニメオタクです。
I've heard from Kenji Tsumura that you are a big fan of anime.
そこかよ。そうだけど、いつ頃かなと。なんで好き？ アニメが好きになったのは小学生くらいの頃か10歳くらいですね。
マジックとどっちが先？
アニメです。
安岡さんは、僕もう10年以上付き合いがあるんですけど、いまだにわからないことが多い。もうとても神秘的というかミステリアスなプレイヤーなんですけど、誰よりも練習をしないけど一番強いっていう、僕の中では日本人で一番強いプレイヤーだと思うんですけど、全然練習をしない
半分ぐらいは本当です。でも昔は結構やっぱりやってて、ただやっぱりそのチーム武蔵として活動するようになって、いつも以上にはやるようになりました。ただ、練習してもしなくてもそんなに変わらないんじゃないかなとも思ってます。
結城市川はここ数年で出てきた日本のライジングスターですけど、顔が怖いってよく言われてるんですけど、なので顔は怖いんですけどプレーがとても丁寧で、もうすごいキビキビしてて、宣言とかも対戦相手にしっかり分かりやすいようにいう、もう本当にお手本のようなプレイヤーです。もちろん実力もしっかりしてますし、
もともとマジックオンライン専門のプレイヤーだったんですけど、そのリアルとマジックオンラインではその情報量が全然違って、そこの見落としで結構負けるところが多かったんですね、リアルに入った時。なのでリアルのゲームでは、注意深くものを見るようにしていたら、ああなった感じです。はい、
健太郎山本さんはとっても静かなプレイヤーですとっても静かで動物が好きなんですけど、本当に日本でもうトップ5には間違いなく入るであろう。
いや、動物はやっぱりシンプルなんですよね。行動原理というかだから癒されるというか、ちょっとわかる。
健幸宏君はとっても面白いプレイヤーとしても面白いデッキをたくさん作ってますし、普段もみんなを笑わせたりするのが得意な人間で、一緒にいてとても楽しいです。彼は放送とかもやってて、それもすごい好評なんですけど、本当にいついかなる時でもみんなを笑わせて和ませてくれる。
僕の中では、おっしゃる通り、やはり日本で一番イケメンなのは山本健太郎。その生き様も人間性ももう全てにおいて、山健が一番、芸能人でいうと学徒ぐらいの、僕の中ではイメージなんで、角張君は、イケメンはイケメンであるけども、ちょっとジャンルが違って、どっちかというとジャニーズ的な、立ち位置であるっていう認識です。
Maria Bartholdi and I have been joined here at the news desk by Paul Cheon. We've got 5 rounds to go in Standard before our cut to the top 8, and we're going to walk you through some of the top decks that the pros have brought this weekend. Paul, what is number 1 on your list?
Well, to nobody's surprise, Ramunap Red. It's a mono red aggressive deck. It's got a ton of 1-drops, a lot of burn spells, and it's basically the deck of the tournament. And the reason why I think this really kind of is taking over Standard is because of a land.
Yeah, right?
4 copies of Ramunap Ruins along with 4 copies of Sun-Scorched Desert means that this deck has a lot of reach. A lot of these 1-mana creatures already exist in the format. You have your Bomat Couriers, Falcon Wrath Gorger, and Village Messenger to get in damage early. And then, of course, the addition of Earthshaker Kenra allows you to force through even more damage, right? So you're able to get in for 12 to 16 damage, and oftentimes you can finish the game with, of course, Ramunap Ruins, Burn Spells, and Hazoret the Fervent.
And a Braid as an addition to this deck, not only helpful in taking your opponent's creatures out or the life total down, but also dealing with any artifacts.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about the Abrade. Traditionally, when you play these mono-red aggressive decks, most of the burn spells that you want to play, you want it to be able to target the opponent. But, I think a lot of people opted to play Abrade, not only because it's a very good removal spell, but again, you want answers to cards like Heart of Kirin and God Pharaoh's Gift, which you had to have expected coming into this tournament.
So the deck that matches up well, at least from what everybody's saying against mono red, is mono black zombies. Tell us a little bit about this deck.
Yeah, so a lot of people actually opted to play zombies, and now it makes a lot more sense to me. When I first looked, I was like, what happened? What changed? It's just won the last Pro Tour, right? And there's a new set that came out. It probably got worse, but a lot of people were tuning their decks to try to beat the mono red deck, which is currently 25% of the metagame. And people were like, how do I beat this mono red deck? Well, mono black. Mono black is the way to go. And the way the mono black zombies deck works is, you're playing a lot of, basically all zombies, highly synergistic deck. And it's one of the main draws to this is that it has multiple ways to deal with a resolved Hazoret the Fervent. Hazoret the Fervent is a threat. I've seen so many decks just lose to this card. 6 cards in hand, and you're just like 5/4 indestructible haste, and it burns. What is this card, right? But Grasp of Darkness exists in the format, really difficult spell to cast, but it's playing 3 copies of that along with 4 copies of Dark Soul of Salvation to get that off the board.
I want to ask about the inclusion of Ifnir Deadlands in this list.
So, yeah, I'm not exactly sure if it's worth it in the current version of Standard. Right now we have so much mono red, but people who opt to play Ifnir Deadlands, it's kind of free, right? Because often there will be times where you use it for colorless mana and, in kind of slower, more grindy matchup. Let's say you're playing against another zombie deck. You can use it for utility in the late game because oftentimes the way these kind of creature-based decks lose is you get a little bit flooded. And what better way to mitigate flood than have utility lands that you can use at some point later on in the game.
All right, next up we've got a deck that's a little bit of a blast from the past, Black-Green Constrictor. Take us through this, Paul.
So another solid choice, Black-Green Constrictor. Just has a lot of large creatures. It really uses the synergy provided by Winding Constrictor, and it really just abuses it. You have, of course, the counter synergies that you get off of cards like Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, Walking Ballista, but not only does Winding Constrictor give you more +1/+1 counters, it's for any type of counter, meaning you can use energy. And in this specific list, we have cards like Attune with Aether, Longtusk Cub. Anytime you produce energy, you get an extra energy. And this is also, I think, a reasonable choice for the tournament because you go over the top of these mono-red decks. The only problem with this is traditionally it has had issues with beating the zombie deck. So I think, if I were going to this tournament, zombies is probably the way to go. But again, nothing wrong with the Constrictor deck. Still a very powerful, highly synergistic deck.
Temur Emerge is next on our list. Speaking of decks that are kind of coming back and having another heyday, tell us about this.
Yeah, so the Temur Emerge deck, this was a deck that I thought was going to be really oppressive. And the reason being is it gets to play a card in Kozilek's Return, which I think has gotten so much better. Again, all the mono red decks, I know I'm talking about mono red all the time, but that is kind of the deck of the tournament. And to be able to have an instant speed way to kind of sweep away all their small creatures is a big game. On top of that, we have, of course, the combination with Elder Deep Fiend. And this combination I thought was going to kind of take over Standard, but it didn't. didn't, because the creatures were kind of bigger. People were playing Winding Constrictor. People were playing Heart of Kirin. So Kozilek's Return didn't really do a whole lot. But now we're in a different world.
Yes.
And in that world, Kozilek's Return is a very, very good Magic card. And I think that's kind of the reason why Temur Emerge came back. There's also a very, very nice new card that it has to kind of enable the emerge of the Elder Deep Fiend, which is, of course, 4 copies of Champion of Wits. And I'm not going to lie, going into this tournament, I thought this was going to be the card at the tournament, but turns out the red cards are too strong.
Speaking of Champion of Wits, it's certainly an all-star in another deck, and this is White-Blue God Pharaoh's Gift, which I know is one of your favorite decks, and is one of mine as well.
Oh yeah, no, this deck is just so sweet. I mean, look at
cool.
this thing. There's just so many value cards. You have the Champion of Wits. This is a deck that's basically looking to fill its graveyard with Minister of Inquiries, Strategic Planning, Champion of Wits. And if you do end up doing that, you can actually activate Gate to the Afterlife, which some people play, some people don't. But if you play Gate to the Afterlife, if you have 6 creatures in your graveyard, you can sacrifice it to fetch God Pharaoh's Gift. And once you get that online, it's really, really difficult to lose. God Pharaoh's Gift with Cataclysmic Gearhulk or Angel of Invention. If you have a God Pharaoh's Gift with an Angel of Invention in your graveyard, you get a 6/6 Flying Vigilance lifelink creature.
I remember when I first saw this list, I was like, Angel of Invention?
Yeah.
What are you doing here? But it's so obvious once you play the deck.
Right. Once you're playing this deck, you want to play a bunch of creatures that have a lot of come into play effects, so you get a little extra value once you start reanimating your creatures with God Pharaoh's Gift. Unfortunately, this deck hasn't really had its time to shine because there's been abrades everywhere. And it feels a little bit embarrassing when your 7-mana artifact gets kind of destroyed by a 2-mana spell that's universally played.
Doesn't feel too good. Yeah. All right, let's take a quick look at Mardu Vehicles. I want to see if this has changed at all since it had its moment in the sun.
Absolutely not. This deck is still a great deck.
Deck's great.
Deck's great. Hasn't changed. Much like the Black Green Constrictor deck, this is still a top contender. You have just basically many of the best cards in Standard. 4 copies of Gideon Ally of Zendikar. Where's that card been?
Yeah, I know.
I haven't really been seeing too much of that.
I never would have expected Gideon to take a backseat basically ever, as long as he was legal.
Right, but I guess Hazoret is giving Gideon a run for its money. But yeah, just again, highly synergistic. This is a deck that can play 3 colors, and it also just has the access to kind of the best land in Standard. You get to play 4 copies of Spire of Industry, which just allows you to play all your spells. You have the best removal in Unlicensed Disintegration, although that might have been kind of usurped by Grasp of Darkness in the current version of Standard. But just overall, again, a lot of synergy, and you get to play 4 copies of Gideon. Can't go wrong with that.
Blue-Red Control. Now, this is a deck that is one of the favorites of my co-host, Megan Wolf. So just for
also
her...
this guy.
Also you? All right, let's take a look at this list here.
All right, so Blue-Red Control is a deck that, you basically just have 4 win conditions, but with the addition of Hour of Devastation, many decks are playing 1 copy of Nicol Bolas God Pharaoh. That's a little spice. I was going through when I was kind of coming up with this, I was like, all right, Blue-Red Control deck, pretty straightforward. And then I was like, wait, this one's got a Nicol Bolas in it, so let's play this one. Yeah, and again, lots of cheap instant speed interaction, card draw, just a classic control deck with 4 copies of Torrential Gearhulk as the finisher, and of course 1 extra copy of Nicol Bolas. Unfortunately, not seeing a lot of play in the top tables right now because, turns out it has a really hard time dealing with the Ramunap Ruins that's on the battlefield. Yeah.
So can I ask why there's 1 Nicol Bolas in this list?
Because Nicol Bolas is great.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Let's talk quickly about White-Blue Monument. Now, this is a deck that was pretty popular coming into this tournament, so I'm kind of surprised to see a little bit less of it, but let's take a look.
Yeah, so we have the White-Blue Monument deck, and the way this deck functions is, you basically all white creatures with, Oketra's Monument is kind of the centerpiece of the deck. Oketra's Monument, it's a 3-mana artifact that reduces the cost of your white creatures by 1, and whenever you play one of those, you get to make a 1/1 Vigilance token. So you can, if you have any draw that you have with the Oketra's Monument, you can just kind of feel like you can't lose. But outside of that, it still gets to play a reasonably fair, like a mono white shell. And I think part of the reason why, again, this deck hasn't really been doing all that hot is
Mono red, Ramunap Ruins.
Ramunap Ruins, all those cards. And also it does have kind of weak matchups to a lot of other cards. If you play against the God Pharaoh's Gift deck, for example, a lot of people are playing Cataclysmic Gearhulk. Right. That's a card that's really, really difficult to deal with when you're trying to create just an army of 1/1 tokens. But still a solid option.
All right, let's take a look at black-red mid-range. All right, so here's a deck that normally in colors that are pretty aggressive, but being a little bit more in the center of things here.
Yeah, so now this is just kind of your traditional Goblin Dark Dwellers control deck, although I guess this, at least in this list, they decided Glorybringer is a far better card. And I do like the fact that Glorybringer is now like seeing a lot more play.
Yeah,
which is
so
a very, very powerful card. Even when I was talking to Martin Yuza, he was just like, yeah, whatever deck I play, I want to make sure I play 4 copies of Glorybringer, and I also want to be playing Abrades and Chandras. And this kind of goes along with that, but it's opting to play black, which does give you access to Grasp of Darkness, again, a nice cheap removal spell to deal with Hazoret. And, it's got a new card, Doomfall.
Doomfall.
Yeah. So Doomfall, when you look at Doomfall, you're like, well, this doesn't seem like an overly powerful card, right? Both sides of those cards, making your opponent discard a non-land spell for 3 mana, coercion effect, not great. Making an opponent sacrifice a creature for 3 mana, not that great. But it turns out when you add kind of that flexibility to a card, it actually ends up just being super powerful, much like kind of the commands in previous sets. So you have the Doomfalls, you have the Goblin Dark Dwellers to bring that back, and then, of course, you have the Planeswalkers that you can lean on to kind of take over the late game.
All right, our final deck here is red-green ramp. Paul, what is this deck trying to do? I assume ramp into something cool.
Let's see. Well, it's a red and green deck that's looking to ramp.
Okay.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
nailed
In
it.
case you didn't know. No, but yes, it's a red-green ramp deck, and ramp didn't really have a power, with the loss of kind of Nissa's Pilgrimage in the previous sets, there just weren't a lot of great ramp effects. But from Hour of Devastation, really, really fantastic ramp effect, Hour of Promise.
Yes.
Now, Hour of Promise, 5 mana sorcery, search your library for 2 land cards. If you have 3 deserts on the battlefield, you get to put 2/2/2 zombies on the battlefield. And what's so awesome about that ability is the fact that you have this awesome ramp effect, but at the same time, you get to protect yourself, right? You're not just playing ramp spells like, oh, please don't kill me. You got these zombies to lean back on, and then you get to untap. Then you can start dropping your heavy hitters and then taking over the game with those cards.
Well, thanks so much, Paul. You've got to head to the booth for Standard, and we'll be back with your feature matches after these messages.